Back at it here on a Wednesday night. If you're catching us on the podcast, remember we stream live. You can be a part of it. We stream live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. here on Too Deep, a football podcast. You can even comment if you'd like in the chat room. If you are getting us on the YouTube, the Twitch, the Facebook, you can comment live as we broadcast the show. We welcome your comments. Love to have you as part of the conversation with us, as always. Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com. New computer day for Jeff Chadiha. We'll see what that means. Any gremlins or anything's going up like that. Eric Eager from Sumer Sports is with us, the VP of Research and Development there at Sumer Sports. You can find them at sumersports.com. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. You can catch my show weekdays 2 to 6 at 810WHB.com. We've got a lot of things we want to get to today as we got to move. We got busy schedules. I want to talk about whether or not Tom Brady actually has finally got too much on his plate to be successful. The Bucs are still winning 2-1, but the offense has really struggled. Is Lamar Jackson finally silenced all his critics? Is Jalen Hurts actually becoming, or has he arrived as an elite quarterback? Are the Bills still the team to beat? Did injuries again eliminate the Chargers as contenders for a championship? Is the AFC West frankly overrated? Are the Jags for real? Dallas and Cleveland operating with backup quarterbacks. How are they doing it? Are they for real? And what are we looking for in week number 4? Jeff, let's start it off with Tom Brady. Covered him for a while. He's a Michigan guy. You've known him for a while. Banged up offensive line, lack of receivers, and rumors of issues at home. Is this finally too much for even the great Tom Brady to handle?
You know, I've posed this question to a few people I know around the league. You get the same answer always when it comes to Tom Brady, that shouldn't bet against him. You know, hyper-focused. Nobody does it like Tom. Nobody can block out the noise. But it just feels like watching him from afar that he seems a little different this year. He seems thinner, seems a little more worn down, looks a little bit older. And it kind of feels like, and Eric can appreciate this, seeing Brett Favre at the end of his career with the Vikings. Brett Favre got old in like a year. He went from being super spry and big arm and super motivated to get one more championship to just looking old. And it just feels like there's a lot weighing on Tom Brady these days. And I do think the injuries are piling up. But, it's hard to go out there and play at that age and not have a perfect situation around you. And they've got guys who will come back. We know Godwin will be back at some point, and Julio Jones may play this week and be off next week. That's what Julio does now. And they've probably added like 18 receivers since then. The offensive line being banged up is a concern, but just I think the amount it takes for him to score points, to sustain drives. They've got 3 touchdowns this season. They're averaging 1 touchdown per game, and then you got to go home and deal with everything else. And when you have your wife coming out and doing national interviews and talking about this is her time, and didn't want him to go back into football, I just think every day that he's breathing, like he's dealing with something. And at 45, that's much harder to do than when you're 25. So, yeah, I think it is going to have a cumulative effect on him long term and affect his play in that team's success.
It turns out he's human, Eric. I mean, has real human problems to deal with as well. I mean, do you see a guy that's now finally got more than he can handle?
Well, I think the only thing that, with Brady, it's like the only thing that keeps me from being all out on him is we've had seasons like this before, right? So you look at, let's say 2013 is the one that I like to think of. They go 12-4, but he only completes 60% of his passes. He has a passer rating of 87, which is something to scoff at nowadays, right? And he comes back and, wins the Super Bowl. He wins 4 more Super Bowls after that, right? You look at 2019, again, less than 61% completion, 88 passer rating. Guy goes to a different team and wins the Super Bowl, and then leads the league in passing yards and touchdowns and yards per game and all that stuff the following year as well. So my issue is is Brady done, or is Brady in one of these other lulls that he's been in before in his career, which is they've happened before. I mean, even if you look back 2006, right? Passer rating of 88. And then 2007, and they go get Moss and Welker and Dante Stallworth and Adalius Thomas, and they go undefeated. And it's like, we've seen Brady come back from the dead. Now, he's old now, right? And that, I think, is where I have my reservations. But we've had years where, remember when Aaron Dobson was his number one receiver, and there's that Thursday night game, and he's shouting the guy out, I remember there was a game 2013 Thursday Night Football against the Jets, and they may have won like 13-7, and that guy's cussing out every wide receiver on his team. We've seen him in this doldrum before. The question is this the last one? And I think Jeff is probably right in that all the other stuff that's being added to this that had never been a problem before is now a problem.
It turns out problems at home are a problem for everybody. The old adage, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? Like he may be finally experiencing that phenomenon. He's had maybe, great support up until now. We don't know, but there's, you could be like, well, who knows? Like, is this real? Or there, how do we know? We don't know, but we do know this. There've never been rumors like this, right? That the family thing always seemed to be firmly behind him. And certainly the offense will look better if they get all their weapons back. They're supposed to have Mike Evans back this week. That's going to help a lot, or will have Mike Evans back. He was suspended. That will help. They get Godwin back. That will help. The offensive line's not coming around, though. That's going to be, one that he's going to have to battle all year long. Is the offense, even with all its pieces, Jeff, good enough for them to be at the top of the heap?
I think there's a chance. Look, Mike Evans is a great receiver. Chris Godwin, when he's healthy, is a Pro Bowl receiver. Leonard Fournette runs the ball very well. Donovan Smith coming back, their left tackle, is a big deal. Once he's back in, you can feel a lot better about what they have, because they can probably scheme up the other two guys, the inside guys, with Shaq Mason and Tristan Wirfs on the right side. But he's at that stage now where it's a lot like Peyton Manning was in 2015. If they win a championship with this bunch, it's going to be because that defense is playing lights out and he's managing the game. I don't see it where he's going to be out there week in, week out, putting up 35, 40 points like he did back in the good old days. It's just there's a lot going on there. And when that offensive line is as banged up as it is, has lost what they've lost, and you're exposing him to hits, you just don't want to have that happen. I think they will play more conservatively because of that, because they have a defensive-minded head coach now who's going to count more on that defense and do less of what Bruce Arians would have done, which is air it out. So, yeah, I think that there's a chance. There's a lot of talent still there. But, yeah, it's, they've had so many guys go down, it seems like every week since July, August, that it's going to be tougher. It's going to be a lot tougher.
Yeah, I like this one. A competitive ego can take you to the top, and it can take you to the bottom as well. Is that part of it, that, his belief in himself that he can do it is really, what keeps him around? We've talked about this, I think, before. John Unitas with the Chargers, Joe Namath with the Rams. The idea. Joe Montana did come to the Chiefs and take that team to the AFC Championship game. He did go to the Bucs and win a championship, but eventually. He's not going to be 70. At some point, it's going to end.
Well, you look at how a lot of these players have ended, right? Jeff talked about Brett Favre. Brett Favre had 10 touchdowns, 19 interceptions his final year with Minnesota. Troy Aikman, who, Soren doesn't think was any good, but when he was his final year with Dallas, 7 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, certainly not a great ending. Dan Marino, one of the best players to ever play in the NFL, his final year, 12 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. Obviously, Manning, I think, had the 10 touchdowns, 17 picks. It doesn't, like, these guys don't walk away, right? The only one, like, John Elway walked away, right? And he walked away on top, 2 Super Bowls. He was carried by Terrell Davis in a defense, but he actually played really well in the Falcons Super Bowl. He was the reason that one went the way it went. But for the most part, these guys have to be dragged off the field, right? Like, Brett Favre, for God's sakes, his last start, that was the Metrodome. The Metrodome collapsed. Then they have to play a makeshift game in the Gopher Stadium with no heating coils. The guy literally gets his head banged against a cement, like turf, and that's how he went out. Like, that's emblematic of all these things. Unfortunately, I think that's probably what's going to happen. for these guys that stay around or are good enough to start, I mean, that's probably what ends up happening. And for the other guys, they're like Flacco. They get benched and Matt Hasselbeck. They get benched and hang around for 10 more years. But Mark Brunell. But like everybody else is kind of, they start and they suck. And they're like, I don't want to do this anymore.
I'll stick up a little. I think Elway's performance was a little better. He missed a couple of games, but in 12 games, 22 touchdowns, 10 interceptions.
Yeah, Bobby Brister was 4-0 as a starter that year, though, too.
Who was?
Bobby Brister was a backup.
Yeah, I mean, they were a tremendous football team. Like I'm not denying that he didn't have a lot of help around him, but I think he played at a pretty high level that final year.
It usually goes that way, though, right? Like it usually goes because Elway, and I know Sam McDowell doesn't think Elway was that good, but like Elway was carrying a team, right? Like Elway was carrying a team for years and could never get over the hump. And then they built a team around him finally with a great coach. And that's how it happened. Brady has gone the other way. Brady went from a great team to now he's trying to carry a Bucs team with no one, at least on the offense side of the ball. That defense is very good. But it's going the other way, and it's not going to go well.
Jeff, does anybody fire strays at random people more than Eric Eager? Sam McDowell's a columnist for the Kansas City
I
Star.
love Sam. Sam's great.
A friend, I know. I'm just explaining to the uninitiative that are in other towns than Cincinnati, where you're based, or Kansas City, where Jeff and I are. He's a columnist for the Kansas City Star and friend of our podcast here. So that's where that's coming from.
Listener to the show.
Listener. That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Might as well fire some shots out at him. No, but I think it's a valid point, and we'll see. I think both these teams in this game, the Chiefs and the Bucs, have a lot to prove. Both offenses are struggling. Both defenses are better than advertised. The Bucs was supposed to be pretty good. It's been great. Chiefs was, a work in progress with some optimism, but it's been pretty good, as we've talked about on other podcasts. So I think this is a really interesting game. One thing the Bucs can fall back on if Godwin doesn't play is that they've got another major weapon coming. The Chiefs have maybe proven to be a little more banged up than people realized. Andy Reid kind of alluding to Orlando Brown and his knee injury today in his media session. I saw Trey Smith walking in the locker room. He was hobbled. I mean, Harrison Buckner, the kicker who's hurt, was moving around just fine. Trey Smith looked like a guy who was, it was painful just to walk across the locker room. So I think we got a little bit more of a window into what went wrong with the Colts and why Trey Smith was on roller skates, because I don't know that he has a foot or an ankle on one side, and that's a problem against Vita Vea. So I think an interesting game, certainly for everyone to watch. Lamar Jackson, much maligned, much celebrated, much debated, had some up and down years. Jeff, has Lamar Jackson, who is now prominently on ESPN, named the front runner. I know there's a working relationship between NFL Network and ESPN. He has been dubbed the MVP of the league, at least on one show. The next show then gives it to Jalen Hurts. We'll get to that in a minute. But Lamar Jackson right now, has he answered all critics just with this start this year?
Well, he has to do it for a whole year, right? He has that, and he's had great seasons before, but there's always been that knock. Can't throw outside the numbers, can't process fast enough. You can trick up defenses to take his running away and really neutralize him. I watched their first game of the season against the Jets, and it really shocked me how much he was almost trying to force himself to be a pocket passer in that game. Granted, it's the Jets. He only ran twice in that game, or 6 times in that game. I think only 2 were called runs. And so he was really trying to sit back there and be Dan Marino, Troy Aikman, and it worked. And so I thought, are they really going to try and force this year and take away what he does best? And then he comes back the next 2 games and has 100 yards rushing and, whatever, 3 touchdowns passing. And so I do think they found a nice balance with him and a nice rhythm of what he's doing. He's certainly motivated to prove that, he deserves the kind of money he's seeking in his next contract. But yeah, the guy's 87% of their offense right now. I mean, it's almost ungodly to think of what he's doing at this level, creating that much productivity behind an offensive line that's beaten up. They just got J.K. Dobbins back in the backfield. He's been banged up. And so he doesn't really have a really healthy, established running threat with him. He's throwing to young receivers. And so outside of Mark Andrews. And so, I think he's answered a ton of questions. And at this pace, he will be the MVP, and he will. It's funny because I almost feel like Jalen Hurts, and we'll talk about him soon enough, is in a better position to be that first quarterback of that style to win a championship. But Lamar, what he's doing in Baltimore, could get him his second MVP easily.
Eric, Jeff just said it. He's already got one MVP under his belt. Last year, we've talked about the declining numbers. That's been a conversation we've talked about for more than a year. 6 touchdowns, 3 INTs when he grabbed the starting nod for the last 7 games in 18, but then 36-6, his MVP year, in addition to his incredible rushing. But then 26-9, 16-13. He's already got 10. He's leading the NFL while he's 17th in yards passing, but he accounts for that, on the rushing side as well. 10 touchdowns leads the NFL. I'm a big believer that touchdown passes are one of the strongest indicators. Just in and alone, quantity of touchdown passes you throw is a strong indicator of how good you are as a quarterback. That he's better than anybody to this point in that category. Where do you sit on whether or not he has arrived as one of the true elites?
Yeah, and he led the league the year that he won the MVP. 9% of his passes were touchdowns in 2019. 11.4% of his passes this year are touchdowns. But I think the big one for me is the efficiency. So, the funniest thing about Lamar Jackson is even in his MVP year, he only, and this is well above average, but it's not God tier. He only averaged 7.8 yards per attempt. That went to 7.3 in 2020 and 7.5 in 2021. He's at 8.5 right now. If you look at adjusted yards per attempt, which factors in, not throwing interceptions and that kind of thing, 9.8. When you look at, and when you take into account like the lack of sacks he's taking, only 6 so far this year, he's leading in adjusted net yards per attempt throwing the ball. So there's a lot to like about him as a passer. And I think what I'm liking is when I look at this team, obviously Rashad Bateman, you spend a first-round pick on him. Mark Andrews, I know Chiefs fans are going to get angry when I say this, but Mark Andrews is playing better than any tight end in the NFL and has been for 2 years now. But when I look at where he's going, Devin Duvernay has only gotten 8 targets all year. He's turned them all 8 into catches and 3 touchdowns, right? That's a late-round pick out of Texas. When you look at, DeMarcus Robinson.
I think third-round pick, just to be clear.
Yeah, sure. But still not a high round. DeMarcus Robinson, our friend, even has a touchdown here on 7 targets. He's not it's not like they went out and got him Devontae Adams or got him Tyreek Hill. He's working with the kind of scrubs he had worked with forever, and he's elevating them. And that's what you needed to see. That's what you need to see out of a guy who you're going to pay $50 million to, right? And that's what we're seeing here.
The only thing I would caution is win against the Jets, loss to the Dolphins, and a win against a Patriots team that seems like it's sinking, right? So there is the caliber of opponent. Listen, they haven't already handed in the trophy. I think it's undeniable that he has taken his game to yet another level with the TDs.
No one's won any of these season-long awards. To be honest with you. The year Mahomes won the MVP, Drew Brees was the MVP for the first 12 weeks of the year, and that was Mahomes threw 50 touchdowns. Like these things, And so you're right, Petra. I mean, do you think home game against Buffalo, against one of the better defense in the NFL, and I know they're injured, but they have 2 of the greatest minds running their defense in Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott. A win, another 3 touchdowns through the air and 100 yards on the ground, and then and a win. That would be I think what you need to see out of Lamar.
That Dolphins game though was impressive because that team gave him fits last year with that 0 blitz, and he sliced them up. I mean, if you watch that game, and granted they ended up losing, they were up 21. Mainly because of everything he was doing. He was throwing 70-yard touchdown passes. He was 75-yard touchdown run. That's going to be one of the better defenses in the league all year long. And they couldn't do anything with him.
By the way, he's 5th in the NFL in rushing at 9.3 yards per carry.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I think part of what they've done, and I've, they've been on a secondary TV for me. I haven't had a game where they haven't been on national TV yet, right? The schedule makers oftentimes, they finished last, they must suck. No, they're going to have a great record because they're playing a last place schedule. Get the Ravens, any big game against the Ravens on national TV.
They've been a noon game every single week.
Yeah, which is ridiculous that, the inability to look at the total body of work of the Ravens and Harbaugh and Jackson and not focus on them a little bit more. I'll have to look. They may have 5 primetime games here moving forward. So, there's only been 3 weeks, so not everybody can be in a primetime game up until now. But I do think it's, this Bills game is kind of a big one. It's an interesting week in the NFL. We mentioned the first one, Chiefs and Bucs. That's a game that, there's a lot riding on it for both those offenses trying to prove what they are. Well, this is a chance for the Ravens. Okay, yeah, we've had a couple of teams that aren't that good, but you slap the Bills, and all of a sudden you are the front runner, right? It'll be their Super Bowl if they grab the win in that one, depending upon what Miami does. But I think it'll be a hell of a statement game. We mentioned Jalen Hurts. I was amazed at how much he's playing very well, Jeff, but I was amazed at how much on a national scale. And I think it's because Philadelphia is a major TV market. So you talk Jalen Hurts, you get a lot of people paying attention. But through 2 games, had 1 touchdown, and the anointing of Jalen Hurts was amazing. He's playing well. I don't mean to knock the guy. Good football team, very good at the line of scrimmage. They've got him weapons. Every quarterback that's going to have a big year needs weapons. Are they setting up Jalen Hurts to knock him down later on in Philadelphia?
It's funny you asked that. I'm actually going to be in Philadelphia tomorrow interviewing him, and so I was doing my homework, and I was shocked at the way they talk about him. You would think he'd have like 15 touchdown passes. Yeah. He's got 4 touchdown passes right now, and he hasn't. I mean, Lamar Jackson obviously has scored more, but he's just been more productive in so many different parts of the offensive statistical categories. And so, but I think what the excitement is that he, for so long, has been in this place of, is he really a good quarterback? Can he really be a franchise quarterback? Is he somebody who can, take this team to a championship? And really, to be honest with you, he's got Carson Wentz at his back, blowing behind him. That the residue of that situation of he was the guy who replaced him. And so is he going to end up falling back to where Carson Wentz fell back to? I got a ton of respect for the guy because I feel like he probably, more than any starting quarterback in the NFL, has gone through more stuff in the last, 5 years, going back to college, into the pros, and people doubting him and not giving him a chance and wondering what he could be. And he just gets better every year. And I know his quarterback coach, Quincy Avery, who works with a lot of these guys nowadays. And, he said 3 years ago when Jalen Hurts was coming out of college that Jalen Hurts was going to be the litmus test for this type of quarterback, this dual threat, this running quarterback who's not really that polished as a passer. Is this guy going to be able to succeed in the league? And so far, he's proven he can. And they've put a ton of weapons around him, with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. I mean, he's got everything you could want as a quarterback and a great defense. But he's doing his part as well. And so, I do think he will be in the MVP conversation. And I do think of all these guys who are more dual threat quarterbacks, he's in the best position to win a championship.
I find it interesting if you look at just the basic passing numbers right now for Jalen Hurts. He has on the year he's thrown for
a little under 1,000 yards, 916 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. But you do have.
But wait a minute. Let me play this game with you. 916 yards, 67% completions, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. There's a guy who has 772 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 1 interception, is completing 69% of his passes, and nobody's saying boo. He's not 3-0. He's 2-1. Do you want to guess who it is?
Is that Wentz?
Trevor Lawrence.
Well, no, people are saying Trevor Lawrence is the next.
They're not saying boo about Trevor Lawrence. They're not like Jalen Hurts.
But Jalen Hurts, I'll say this. Jalen Hurts is leading the league in yards per pass attempt. He's leading the league in yards per completion. He's throwing for 305 yards a game, which is if you think about that, that's up over almost 100 yards from last year. Net yards per attempt, because he's only taken 7 sacks. He's leading the league in that.
Against Detroit, I know world beaters.
Hold on.
Don't go there. That's right.
Detroit's 3-0 against the spread, Petro.
He is 3-0 against the spread, which in some ways means that they've just undervalued what the team is as a whole, and certainly what Jalen Hurts is. I'm not here to run him down. I'm fascinated by how much hype comes early. He's beaten the Lions, the Vikings, and the football team.
Well, so the last 2 weeks. So if we're going to go after volume here, I think that we have to be a little bit careful because they've had halftime leads in all those games that have been big. And the last 2 weeks, they scored 24 points in the first half of the game and 0 points in the second half, which you could say the 0 points in the second half are an indictment on Hurts, but you can also kind of say, well, they're kind of that team that lets their offensive and defensive line control a game when they're ahead. And so, I think the volume, like I want to see Jalen Hurts, and we might see this week against Jacksonville. They're 7-point favorites, but Jacksonville went into Los Angeles is basically that last week and won outright. I want to see Jalen Hurts in a slugfest. I want to see him in a back and forth kind of battle where he's got to match touchdown for touchdown with another great quarterback. Because to your point, right now the quarterbacks he's faced are, Jared Goff, who's going to be in the playoffs this year, but is not a great quarterback. Kirk Cousins, who's going to be in the playoffs this year, is also not a great quarterback. And Carson Wentz, who's not going to be in either. But, I want to see him go to battle against a great quarterback.
I just sit here. I mean, first of all, he's been given immense weapons. Devontae Smith was a top 10 pick. They got A.J. Brown in the draft this year. And I look at Lamar Jackson, who Baltimore fans will still be saying, who are you giving this guy to throw to? You mentioned Mark Andrews is absolutely a weapon. That's true. But Devin Duvernay, you called him a late round pick. He's a third round pick. He's not a top 10 pick. You didn't trade a first rounder to get him. You traded away the first round wide receiver you had drafted for him, and Marquise Brown, and he's throwing for 10 touchdowns. Like, I got no issue with the hype that's coming around Lamar Jackson. But, I had on Eitan Shander, who does TV and radio in Philadelphia. And, before this past week, and he had thrown one touchdown, and he goes, yeah, but he manages the game. Can you imagine that coming out? It's the way he manages the game. Can you imagine that ever being said about Donovan McNabb, who, by the way, in Philadelphia was the first quarterback to ever throw for more than 30 touchdowns and less than 10 interceptions in a season? That doesn't sound like a big deal now, but he was the first guy to ever do it. And did they ever think he managed the game? It's amazing. Give somebody some piss poor play for a little while, and they will crave what they used to shun. Okay. And just as they craved Andy Reid after a couple of years, they craving them some Donovan McNabb. I mean, like, let's call our shots. Is he more Alex Smith, more Donovan McNabb, or is he more Patrick Mahomes, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady? What is Jalen Hurts more like?
Oh, you're talking about that's a big spectrum you're talking about there. I think obviously he's closer to the McNabb, Alex Smith, but that's not a bad thing.
No,
to me. And so he doesn't have to be a future Hall of Famer to be a really good quarterback. And I think he's trending towards being a really good quarterback. I think what helps him out a lot too, what creates the hype, not just, I think someone mentioned the division, the right team, the right schedule, the right division, which is true. To make it a hound dog said that. But it's also the way they were playing last year. They tricked up their offense just so they could survive last year. They went from being a team that wanted to do all this stuff they're doing now to a team that was running the wishbone for the last, whatever it was, 11 games this season. And they made the playoffs doing that and were the number one rushing team in football. But you're like, okay, what do we really have here? Is this going to be Lamar Jackson 2.0 offense you're running, or are you going to be able to do something that is a little more conventional? And they've gone to conventional like sports cars go from 0 to 100. Like, it was like to be where they are versus where they were last year offensively, scheme-wise, it's jaw-dropping.
And that's what you want, right? Like, this is what I love. I think Howie Roseman's the executive of the year for a few reasons, right? One of them is showing pragmatism. When you draft Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, it doesn't work and you move on, right? But the biggest one is this exact conversation, which is not every quarterback needs to be Patrick Mahomes. Not every quarterback needs to be even Kyler Murray. And I don't even know at this point if the Cardinals would want to have that back or not. Sometimes your quarterback's Jalen Hurts, and it's okay to be like, look, we have a 4-year window when this guy's making hardly any money, and let's build this thing around him and try to win a Super Bowl. And like, they're not the favorites in the NFC, but they're one of the favorites in the NFC, in large part because they said, this window is what it is. And instead of, to Jeff's point, last year they tried doing this. Like early in the year, they tried throwing the ball and not running to the running backs, and Miles Sanders was making every fantasy owner angry and all this kind of stuff. And they switched and they started winning football games. And then they were like, okay, well, how are we going to win with Jalen Hurts? He's clearly an asset at this value. I made him at PFF the most valuable player per dollar in the NFL last year. And you add AJ Brown, you add Jordan Davis, you add James Bradbury to the defensive side of the ball. You just add, and this team should win a Super Bowl this year, or it should at least contend. And that's what you want. The question of whether he's going to be the long-term starter for this team, making $50 million a year, let future Howie Roseman solve that problem, to quote How I Met Your Mother. That has to be the next conversation, and maybe he can play his way into it. But to Jeff's point, the ascension, when you look at how the stats have evolved, 52% completion as a rookie, 60% completion last year, 67 this year, it's trending in the right direction.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. Trending in the wrong direction is the Buffalo Bills. Okay. They amazingly 500 plus yards to like 200 yards, over 40 minutes of time of possession to 20. I mean, I swear to God, that game, you look at it and you say, okay, well, they must have been -5 in turnovers. No, they're -1. You go, well, it must have been 5-4. And the Dolphins threw 4 long bombs that were glorified punts, and the Bills had like 3 scoop and scores going the other way. No, it's one of the most bizarre games ever that a team is so statistically dominated another, but the Bills did find a way to lose to the Dolphins. And frankly, that's what they do. The Bills are now 0-6 in one-score games, including the playoffs, in their last 6 games. They have a fundamental problem there. Losing Hyde, their safety for the year, secondary banged up, don't have Tre'Davious White back yet. Is it time to slide them over? And have we already gotten to where they're not the super team we thought they were coming into the year, Jeff, or even that we thought they were after 2 weeks?
Yeah. I mean, they've come back to earth a little bit for sure with the injuries, and that's what everybody was saying to begin with. That great team, but if someone key gets banged up, or 2 or 3 guys who are key players get banged up, like any team in the NFL, you're going to have problems. Hyde to me is a big loss, even though they play a lot of zone coverage, and they rely more on their defensive front to get after the quarterback. Now he's such a smart player. He's so versatile. I've said having those 2 guys back there is like having 2 Tyrann Matthews back when he was playing well for Kansas City. They can do so much coverage wise, and they can cover up so many issues. They're playing 2 rookie corners. The rookie corner just got hurt too. Christian Benford just fractured his hand. Yeah. So now you're down your top 3 corners, or 3 of your top 4 corners. So that's a tough road to hoe right now. And it says something about their coaching, that they held Miami to what they did, given what Miami has on offense. But yeah, that game, watching that game, it was very bizarre to see the mistakes they made right up to the point that their offensive coordinator's head exploded at the end. It was just so many opportunities to do what championship teams do, and they just couldn't do it. And look, they still have the most talented team. They still have a lot of games to play where they can be great, but you can't have, to Matt Rowland's point here about Josh Allen, you can't have him throwing 63 passes in a game. Like, those days need to be over. It needs to be 40 tops, more running, more what they were doing the first 2 games. And I think they will get back to that, but certainly Miami beating them in week 3 was a wake-up call for them.
Eric, at the Ravens, I got to stretch here. At the Ravens, home for the Steelers, which I know with Mitchell Trubisky is not going to scare anybody, but Mike Tomlin will have a game plan and will drag you into a fight. And then they go to Kansas City, home for the Packers. 4 games from now. Are we saying what Matt said? They rely too much on Josh Allen. The injuries are putting more on Josh Allen. Or do we go, all right, look at the stretch they just came through, and here they sit in the 1 seed in the AFC. What do you think's more likely?
I think the former. Like, that defense is banged. I mean, they just signed Xavier Rhodes, and I know, like I said, I think the world of Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott, but like, at some point you have to face facts that your secondary. Micah Hyde's a terrific player. Trey White's got has a road ahead of him to come back and be who he was. Linebacker, they're not great anyway. So if they split those games, what do we think of them? Like, they're kind of the same team as they were last year, right? Where they're good, and when they decide to put it on a team, they're better than anybody in the league. But they can't focus enough to win enough games to get this 1 seed in this conference. That I think is what I'm worried about for them, because the injuries are piling up, but also you can see kind of the imperfections in Josh Allen's game show up, and even though I do still think that they're the best team in the AFC, this stretch of games is going to show us a lot.
It is going to be a statement for them one way or the other. The Chargers, listen, you get one injury. We talked about J.C. Jackson coming into the year that they signed him, and then he, in classic Charger fashion, decides right before the season to get surgery done instead of getting it done a long time ago, something that he's had his entire life.
Since birth.
Yes, birth. Got to get it done now. Right now is the time to get it done. That was kind of Charger-esque. We're like, okay, but here we sit. I mean, I'm looking at the red on the depth chart and then going down here to the reserves and seeing who's down on the reserves. And it's the usual list. I mean, Rashawn Slater's down there. Joey Bosa's down there. Keenan Allen. The injuries are just are popping up. Are they already done before they ever really even got out of the gate, Jeff?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, just because, and we will talk about these two teams very shortly, but I said the Browns were done, and I said the Dallas Cowboys were done not too long ago, and look where they're sitting. And so really the challenge for the Chargers is finding a way to deal with all these injuries and to play a different style of football. And so, like, you lose a Joey Bosa for whatever it's going to be, at least a month with that groin injury. You lose your left tackle for the season. Keenan Allen being down, I think a receiver tore his ACL. Was Guyton tore his ACL in that game as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and your quarterback's playing with beat up ribs. You have to adjust. And that's what I have appreciated about the two teams I just mentioned, the Browns and the Cowboys, is that they're playing a different style of football. I was a little bit perplexed watching the Chargers play the Jaguars, and that was as brutal of an ass kicking as you'll see in the NFL in all three phases. But they were still trying to play the same style of football they've been playing, just Justin Herbert got there. And you got to protect your quarterback better if he's going to be out there. You got to be more effective running the football, calling shorter routes, less long developing stuff. But their challenge, is to find a way to adapt and play to their strengths, and learning from these other teams that are going through the same kind of problems. Going back to the Bills, you look at the last 4 teams who won championships in this league: the Patriots, the Rams, the Bucs, the Rams, and the Chiefs. And they all went through some kind of serious adversity during those seasons, whether it was losing players, whether it was stretches where they weren't playing at a high level. And so if you want to be at that table, you better accept that no one's going to give it to you, and it's not going to come easily. And so, do I think the Chargers are done? No. But do I think that they can be done by not adjusting and adapting to what's going on? Certainly, I feel that way about them.
We touched on their schedule, in the past, at Texans, at Browns. Browns, as Jeff just said, are surprisingly sitting at 2-1. Broncos are ugly on their route to 2-1. What do we think? Is that schedule soft enough to right the ship, even with the injuries that are going on, Eric?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's so much variance in the league right now that I said this on your show today, where it's just like, I don't think schedule difficulty is anywhere close to as meaningful as it used to be. Like the Browns are one end of game screw up away from being 3-0 with Jacoby Brissett. And I'll say this, Jacoby's played well. Like, Jacoby's a top half of the NFL quarterback right now, the way things are going in the league. Right. And who would have said that at the beginning of the season? So I think they're more than capable of righting the ship. It's just, whether or not you're going to, how predictable are we going to be in the NFL this year?
Yeah. How predictable the prediction was that the AFC West was the end all be all. And it hasn't played that way, right? Even though they've got two teams that are 2-1, the Chiefs and the Broncos. The Broncos are an ugly 2-1. There are questions about the Kansas City offense. We did that yesterday on our Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. The Raiders are 0-3. The Chargers have slumped down to 1-2, and like you said, ass kicking at the hands of the Jaguars. Was the division overrated? There's injuries to point to with the Chargers. We mentioned there are a number of injuries in Kansas City as well. Trent McDuffie, a suspension, not an injury, but a suspension to Willie Gay has brought them down a couple of players on defense. Are the Raiders are kind of living up to what they are. I don't think anybody had them 0-3, but most people picked them last. And the Broncos have found a way to get to 2-1. If this was Chargers 2-1 and Broncos 1-2, would this be a topic?
I don't know. I still feel like if you looked at every division in the NFL right now, the AFC West would have a pretty strong debate for still being the best division. Now, maybe you can say the AFC North because Cleveland has outplayed expectations, or the Giants being 2-1 helps the NFC East, but the talent level certainly is still there. I think what we overestimated was how much transition would play a role for all these teams. Like every team we're talking about here is trying to adapt to key players, schematic changes, new coaches. As great as players are, as great as the quarterback position can be, if you have a great quarterback, you still need help. And so I think that's what we're seeing with all these teams is just like for the Broncos, obviously, the help needs to come from the coaching staff. With the Chiefs, help needs to come from the receivers and the offensive line. With the Chargers, they got to get better conditioning or better trainers or better medical staff because people are hurt every year there. But it is, it's week 4 we're going into. Yep. And I would feel pretty confident in saying that the games that are going to be played within the AFC West, we've only seen one game between 2 AFC West teams already, which was a pretty good game. I think every game you'll see against AFC West opponents, 2, the Chargers played the Raiders, is going to be pretty good. And so that's what I was looking forward to, not so much the idea that you're going to have 3 teams at 12-5 and ready to make a run for a championship. I think ultimately they still have 3 of the better teams in this conference playing in this division.
The Broncos go to the Raiders, home for the Colts, and then at the Chargers, and then they get their Jets-Jaguars combo. The Jaguars game is not playing down as easy as it was supposed to. That was supposed to be the prize of getting the last place schedule, was getting the Jacksonville Jaguars, and now they're looking like the best team in the AFC South. So maybe that plays back in Denver. Go ahead.
One second. Because I think this is illustrative of the stuff that we talk about that I think people, I talked about the Bengals and their close game stuff, right? And when we look at the Raiders, last season they were 10-7. They had the point differential of a 7-10 team. Their final 4 games, beating Nick Mullins in Cleveland 16-14, beating Drew Lock starting in place of Teddy Bridgewater 17-13, beating a Colts team full of COVID 23-20, and then beating the Chargers 35-32 in a game that they controlled, but was ultimately closer than it could have been and could have gone either way. You look back into 2022, right? And now you're looking at a 5-point loss to the Chargers, which could have gone either way. A loss in overtime to the Cardinals, where if any one of those 2-point conversions don't get hit, they're winning that game. And then a loss to the Titans where they missed a 2-point conversion to end the game. The Titans did control the game most of the time. But look, close game, like there aren't teams that are good in close games. Teams oscillate in close games. And the Raiders are getting kind of the ass end of variance now. I personally I was low on the Raiders going into the year. I think the Raiders are undervalued. Like they're still sneaky. They're still going to give the Chiefs a hard time. But it's funny how, some of thit's are predictable going into the year. Some of them aren't. And one thing that is predictable is that like close game variance tends to regress to the mean.
Yeah, and it's something we talked about last year and going into this year. It's why we all had the Raiders at the bottom, because I think they were 6-1 in those close games last year, that would come back around. And, just the yin and yang if things would happen to them. They do have a chance against the Broncos at home this week, and then at the Chiefs the following week to get back into the race, right? Get a couple of wins, and they're back in the race. And so we will see. I will say this. Is anybody sold on the head coach in Las Vegas? Just real quick, anybody want to give a yay or nay? Because I get what you're saying, that like, okay, the variance is there, so they should come back around and grab a couple of wins, or maybe they're strong. They're just losing close games, and so now they're going to win a couple by 10 or 12 points, and that's going to happen at least maybe against the Broncos and the Texans. The Saints are looming on the other side over there. But does anybody the one thing that can go wrong is if it implodes, if you can't keep the ship afloat. Does anybody want to say that this is the head coach that's going to make it all go?
I'll say this. I think it's better for him to. I think it's better for him to start 0-6 in his career here than 6-0 in Denver, because 6-0 in Denver caused expectations to be too high, and that got him fired really quickly, right? Like, this is I was talking to this over with Thomas Dimitrov, because he's got the experience with McDaniels before, and it's like, I honestly, this is probably a better start, right? Where you can build into this thing and build expectations up gradually versus what happened in Denver, which was a 6-0 start, a win against the New England Patriots as part of that, and then the crashing down.
Yeah, Soren, weren't you the guy who was talking about the Broncos being the sneaky pick to win this division at the start of the year because of their schedule?
Yeah, absolutely. I was. And they're sitting at 2-1. So, I mean, I don't feel like a moron here by any stretch of the imagination. It doesn't look pretty at all. And Nathaniel Hackett is, I think, maybe it'll allow the Broncos to kind of work through their issues and find their chemistry, that Nathaniel Hackett will serve the role as taking all the focus away from everything else. Russell Wilson is getting some talk that is, man, did they just give a huge contract to a guy who's, could only play in one offense, and that the Seahawks are way smarter than anybody thought in how they used him. Let Russ cook. Turns out all he can make is grilled cheese and scrambled eggs. We're going to find out. Yeah, I mean, that was largely based upon 3 games. Now, I like the Jaguars to be better. You remember when we did our predictions. I was so mad that I didn't have the stones to put the Jaguars in the playoffs. Eric did. Props to Eric. That was he had him there. I love that pick because I was thinking about it. And I'm like, you're just trying to recreate last year's Bengals. Don't do it, stupid ass. Don't do it. So I didn't do it. But I mean, that's why I bring up the game at the Jaguars. I thought, okay, I'm a little early. Jaguars 7-8 wins. Maybe they get to 9. But that game's playing back at them, right? That's not the game. Now, what's good for them is the Chiefs spit the bit on what was looking like the easiest game, the Colts, right? That was the game they got in there. And so I don't know. I just, I don't, that was supposed to be a chance to get them going, and they didn't. And so I don't know. Yes, I do think the Broncos are sneaky, but not the way they're playing right now.
No. I think they can stumble around and just end up I think once you're an ugly winning team, sometimes you can embrace that and just make the most of it, as opposed to thinking we should be playing better, we should be doing more stuff. What's happening here? I could easily see them falling into this rut of saying, hey, if we got to win 11-10 or 16-14, that's just who we are. And if it gets this, go ahead.
It kind of reminds me. So there was a Vikings team back when I was young. They traded for Herschel Walker, and they made the playoffs. They went 10-6 the one year they traded for Herschel Walker, and there was just something off the whole time. Everybody, the previous year they were 11-5, and they their average margin of victory was 15 points. Herschel was the next step, and they won games. Their division was terrible, but when they got in the playoffs, it was clear that they were a fraud, and this Herschel Walker trade was stupid, and it wasn't good. I think this Denver team is similar. I think they could go, Jeff Chadiha's 10-7 here, and possibly win the division. The thing that irritated me was watching the Chiefs lose that game, and in a week where the division could have all lost their games, but they could win this division and just get absolutely murdered in the playoffs because their schedule is easier. And Russ is good enough to be competent enough to win some of those games that are on a platter for him. It's just can they actually compete in the AFC? I think the answer is no.
Can the Jacksonville Jaguars be a real contender, right? The way the AFC South is playing right now, you can certainly win the AFC South. That doesn't look like it's going to take a whole lot. The Colts, got a big win for them and a big win for that division, frankly, last week and coming from behind against the Chiefs. But The Jaguars had a close loss to a Commanders team that hasn't looked good, but it was a road game. Hammered the Colts, hammered the Chargers. I mean, the Colts were supposed to be good, and we saw a week later we're good enough to beat the Chiefs. What are the Jacksonville Jaguars, Jeff?
Legit. I mean, I think that, as you said, I mean, the AFC South is open for business right now. So they're playing like the best team in that division. So they have to be considered a contender just because they can win the division. But, Doug Peterson quietly is doing the same thing he was doing when he first got to Philadelphia, taking a young quarterback who was drafted high and teaching him how to play the position, relying on a really talented defense that is super athletic. I mean, when you watch that team play defense, it jumps out at you, the guys who they have, like the Josh Allens and, who's the kid from Utah they took, the linebacker. I can't remember his name right now, but he's a great player. The kid they took first overall. I mean, they just have so many guys who can run and hit, and it's just they devoured the Chargers. They just look so much faster than the Chargers and the Colts when they played. Yeah, Devin Lloyd, thank you. That they have a really good formula going right now. And that Chargers game, they were getting everybody contributed. It was Christian Kirk, it was Travis Etienne, it was James Robinson. I'm just like, dude, they've got a nice squad that is feeling really good about itself right now. So yeah, they are very much serious.
Yeah, Trayvon Walker adding front side of the play end to help Josh Allen really unleash himself. He's been terrific. Devin Lloyd, Foye Oluokun, two linebackers that they acquired, have been great. And you've seen some development of guys like Tyson Campbell, a guy that the previous regime drafted that Doug's regime wanted to trade. Like they're doing some things, and their offensive line has gotten to that like average-ish thing where when you couple that with the pocket presence of Lawrence and the receivers, Zay Jones, and it can come together. And that division's terrible. The thing that I said today on the Pinnacle podcast was, you look, and I talk it out both sides of my mouth, but all the easiest schedules, so Tampa Bay, Detroit, Minnesota, they're all in the NFC. The sixth easiest schedule in the NFL is the Jags. That is the easiest schedule left in the AFC is Jacksonville.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that Matt was making there. Give them some credit for what they did add quickly. I do think that the cap is going to get on top of them pretty quick. I mean, Doug Peterson did employ the John Dorsey approach. I mean, when they came to Kansas City, Scott Pioli had carved out a big chunk of cap room, and they spent through it immediately, right? And they turned the team around immediately. They started 9-0, finished 11-5, went to the playoffs, had more than a 3-touchdown lead on the Colts. I mean, they got the program up and running, and it seems to be mimicking that exact same kind of turnaround. And I think it's interesting because some similarities there. The Chiefs that year had the 1-1. There was no quarterback. They took Eric Fisher. Was never a great left tackle, but solidified the spot. We've seen Orlando Brown do that with the Chiefs. He's not a great left tackle, but he at least solidified the position where the Colts haven't been able to fix left tackle. They get all the positions that there's lower value on. They nail it, right? But they don't ever get the premium positions. Well, they spend what most people think is too much on Cam Robinson. They go out and sign a guard, right? Don't spend on a guard. Well, what did Andy Reid do? He spent on a guard to help solidify the offensive line last year for Kansas City. So they go out and they get Brandon Scherf. They add that to the equation. Well, we need a pass rusher. Well, nobody loved Trayvon Walker, and everyone thought it was preposterous, but he's brought an elite athlete to the equation. They added more defense in Devin Lloyd, as you mentioned, from Utah. I don't love the receivers. Nobody thought Christian Kirk was worth that money. They're like, I got to give my quarterback a playmaker. And
wide receivers are not available in free agency. They're either available via trade, and you had the first pick, and you didn't like the thing that. And your point is good here, Petro. One of the reasons why I picked Jacksonville to do well this year is because they better. Because next year they're over the cap by $400,000 with 39 players under contract. Like, this is different than the Bears being rebuilding and having all the cap space next year, and the Jags rebuilding and doing it all this year, right? Like if they don't win this year, it's going to be tough for them because next year they don't have a lot of flexibility to do anything with that. And that's with a quarterback on a rookie deal, so they better win this year is another point.
I'm curious. I feel like I've done something wrong. This is the second thing I've seen. I have to ask this question to the gallery. Is the title supposed to be makeshift? Did I do something stupid in when I was typing things up? Like, is there something I tweeted out?
I don't know.
I'm terrified now. I'm going to go to YouTube and I got an F or something. And, I'm going to have to go look at that later. So I just, now I'm terrified of what I've done, but I don't have time to
autocorrect.
You have a pure, like, Petro, you have a pure heart. We all know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It does say make shit on the. I was having, as Soren and Jeff, two of my good friends, know, I was having a rough time before the show. That made that has cheered me up. So
there you go,
Petro. Thanks for falling on the sword as any good friend would.
I do what I can. Jeff, you mentioned the backup quarterbacks in Cleveland and Dallas. Which ones, more surprising, and who should we be more impressed with? Who's more likely to keep it up?
Brissett. Yeah, he's been, like Eric said, just astonishing in the way he's played. And I know he's just managing the game, but he's doing it at a very high level for a team that had a whole bunch of noise around it and was really being written off for all Deshaun Watson stuff. Gotten a lot of help from Amari Cooper, who's playing like the number one receiver again, and obviously a pretty good run game and a pretty good defense. But just the way he's played, they should be 3-0. He's done enough for them to be undefeated. And you look at what they got coming up here. They got 3 winnable games here, including 2 games against teams that got quarterback issues, with injured quarterbacks for the Chargers and the Patriots the next couple of weeks. So you got 3 games there that look like you can go out there and get some wins. If they get the 5 wins in those 11 games that Deshaun Watson are out or more, I'm starting to wonder if you had to play Deshaun Watson at all this year. If you just say, let's ride it out with this guy and see what happens next year with Deshaun. Because
I won't go that far. I would say, though, that the Cleveland Browns are a very good bet at 50-1 to win the Super Bowl. I will just say, like, not that
you're absolutely going to cash that ticket, but just there's value there.
Yeah, I mean, 50-1 means there's a 2%. Like, you need more than 2% for them to win for that to have value. And like to Jeff's point, they could win 6 of these games, 7 of these games, and then Watson comes back and look, they're not going to start Brissett over Watson. They might start him over him 1 game and let him come in and play. There's no way they start him, but I mean. And I'm happy like this. I mean, Brissett's having $10 million starts right now. Every time he goes out there and plays that way, I mean, Brissett's going to be a rich man. Like, he's going to have the Chase Daniel type money for the rest of his life.
Settle.
What do you mean?
Listen, first of all,
he's not.
2 things I'll say. If they just hand it back to Deshaun Watson when he comes back, I think Jeff's point is a much better one than people may realize, because you do not knock 2 years of rust off like it's nothing. Okay, you don't. Mike Vick talked about it. If you've seen the Mike Vick 30 for 30,
sure.
Or he mentioned, like, how long it took him to get back into football shape and into the swing of things and the speed of the game. Like, if you think Deshaun Watson's going to step on the field and he's going to be vintage Deshaun Watson, you're kidding yourself. I mean, I think when he comes back and you hand him the ball, it's going to suck at first. And if I'm wrong, I'll give mad props to Deshaun Watson, the football player, for stepping in and being able to do it, because you're not supposed to step in and be good. He figures to step in and be bad whenever he does. Len Dawson, it even goes back. Len Dawson didn't play for 5 years, and they were saying he sucked when he came to the Texans, eventually the Kansas City Chiefs, the Dallas Texans at the time. And I remember a long time ago, this is how old I am, interviewing Hank Stram and talking to Lenny, God rest his soul. And about how long it took to knock the rust off. Playing the quarterback position didn't get easier since Len Dawson was playing it. And so I will say this. I think staying the course with Jacoby Brissett is not blasphemy. I think it may absolutely end up. I don't think you can do it.
I'm not saying it is blasphemy. I'm saying it's not going to happen. There's no way that they're going to they're going to let.
You remember Case Keenum, Eric. Case Keenum, Minnesota.
Yeah, and the Vikings hit the panic. Like, the Vikings hit the panic button and signed Kirk Cousins after Case Keenum. Like,
yeah, all I'm saying is if they're 7-4 or 8-3 when he's coming back, it's going to be a much tougher decision to put him in there.
Sure, I'm not. But like, my point about Brissett, I'll just point this out. Colt McCoy, who is not a very good quarterback, has cap numbers in his career of 3.6 million, 3.6 million, 3.4 million, 2.25 million, 2.5, and next year his cap hit is $5 million. Jacoby Brissett is earning that kind of money off of these starts, right? Like this is, he's going to be at worst a like premium veteran backup for 10 more years after this.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would argue that. As a guy who roots for a team in Kansas City, if you're not going to run the quarterback sneak with Patrick Mahomes, sign Jacoby Brissett and at least let him come in and run the quarterback sneak and know you've got a competent
Let
quarterback.
Brissett stand in front of Eric Bieniemy and take the bullets for Pat. Let's do that.
All right, what are we looking for in week 4? Eric, you want to start us off? You got one game, one matchup, one player, one storyline you're looking at here in week 4?
I do think I'm very interested in the London game because the NFC, like for one, as somebody who wants to see Detroit make the playoffs, I don't know who I'm
That's
supposed
Saints
to root
Vikings for the uninitiated.
Yeah, Saints Vikings. So I actually think that if Andy Dalton starts with the Saints, they'll win that game. I think Jameis is so hurt that like he's just not able to be who he's supposed to be. His average depth of target's like 20 yards this year. Like he literally doesn't have like he's trying to get these big chunk plays because he can't get through drives with his back hurting. I think that game, whoever wins that game will make the playoffs in the NFC, and whoever doesn't won't. Like that I think is what that game is going to mean, which is great because that's going to be a standalone game when we're all supposed to be at church on Sunday.
Okay. Jeff?
Jags, Eagles. I think this is the prove-it game probably for both teams. It's going to be the toughest defense the Eagles have seen, so we'll learn more about Jalen Hurts, and it will be the best. They played some good teams. Chargers are a good team, but they're banged up. It'll be the best team, the healthiest team that has contention ability that the Jaguars will have seen. If Jaguars go beat the Eagles, Doug Peterson may be on his way to being the coach of the year.
Yeah, I think that Jags Eagles is a fun game. I'm going to go with a game that's off the radar that I like, and that's Browns and Falcons. The Falcons have covered every game, right? And the Browns were giving all this love to the Cleveland Browns, and yet the Browns are laying 1 at Atlanta. The Falcons were a lot of people's pick to be the worst team in the league. Eric uttered earlier, just moments ago, having the Browns to win the Super Bowl is not a bad ticket to be holding right now. Yet they lay 1 to the Atlanta Falcons.
I mean, this is the overcorrection week. The markets had installed the Lions as a 6-point favorite against the Seahawks, a team that the Falcons had to go 12 rounds with Sunday. Right. So we're starting to see the markets kind of like, because they're getting killed on people like me betting Detroit. They're getting killed by people betting the Falcons. Finally, the Falcons cover the spread after Matt Ryan leaves. And yeah, I mean, look, have you seen the Falcons? The Falcons offense is explosive and legit.
Yeah.
They should put Ritter in to actually because I think Mariota is the only guy on that offense is playing crap. Cordero's been amazing. Kyle Pitts, London, good football team.
And somebody didn't like Artie Smith before the season.
It wasn't me.
It was me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're the Atlanta Falcons right now. Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, it's impressive. All right, that's going to do it. Jeff's got an early flight. Eric's got, numbers to look at. And I've got an episode of Letterkenny to watch. So we will bid you adieu right now for the 2D podcast. Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com. Eric Eager from Sumer Sports, sumersports.com. My name is Soren Petro, 810WHB.com, or you can catch my radio show. And remember, if you're catching us via the podcast, we stream live Wednesday nights at 9 p. Central. We've got people listening in countries all over the world, probably a lot of our military folks. I want to give them a salute. I want to tell everybody down in the Florida area that's taking a beating right now with that hurricane. We're thinking of you there as well. A lot of great football fans down there. And I know I've looked, we've got a number of people listening in Florida. So we're thinking about everybody down there in the hurricanes. We appreciate you listening here to the 2D podcast. We will see you live next Wednesday night, whenever you can get to us on the podcast. Thanks for listening to